Hi everyone, my name's Teferi and today I'm going to be giving a presentation on my dissertation topic. So today we'll be looking at the impact of imposter syndrome and perfectionism on burnout in trainee counsellors. Burnout is a risk factor within trainee counsellors that is not discussed enough. Trainees must balance academics, placement and personal life, which is difficult to maintain. But introducing the factors of imposter syndrome and perfectionism really highlights the need for interventions to address burnout levels. This study aims to explore the correlation between IS and perfectionism on burnout within trainee counsellors. 22 trainee counsellors participated in this study, which involved them completing a Qualtrics online questionnaire. Results highlighted which variables impacted burnout, which allows researchers to gain a better understanding on what interventions can be used to tackle this feeling of burnout. Researchers found that mindfulness-based interventions are beneficial at tackling burnout within healthcare professionals, as it aims to pursue a state of mind which is free from self-judgment feelings and self-controlling tendencies. So firstly, what is imposter syndrome? To explain briefly, the traits are the need to overachieve, being a workaholic, feeling self-doubt and feeling like a fraud. Clance and Imes first introduced the term imposter syndrome when they questioned why high-achieving women did not feel a sense of success, even though they had completed major accomplishments. This brought to light the imposter syndrome traits that cause anxieties within individuals due to the fear that they will be exposed as a fraud and be stripped from their achievements. Next, what is perfectionism? The characteristic traits of perfectionism is the need to strive for flawlessness, setting high standards, and having over-criticizing behaviors. Perfectionism is defined as the concerned feeling that one can never live up to his/her high standards. A study completed in 2016 found that many students who were at the top of their class in high school experienced extreme stress due to the anxiety around the idea of failing their classes. Finally, I will be looking at burnout and how imposter syndrome and perfectionism impact feelings of burnout. Burnout is something many people experience but probably don't know they are feeling it. Some of the signs of burnout is feeling emotional exhaustion, which means feeling worn out and drained, experiencing depersonalization, which is the feeling of not being in control, and the sense of being unaccomplished, which has been described as feeling incomplete. These feelings come from prolonged exposure of interpersonal stressors. So why is the focus on trainee counsellors? Trainee counsellors are at risk of all of these factors, as they must learn to balance their education, placement and personal life. For instance, trainees are required to prioritise educational factors, such as attending lectures, submitting essays and completing exams. This is a requirement that trainees need to uphold, as there is a pressure to not only hit university requirements, but also gain a grade that the student is happy with. Trainees must also then focus on their placement, which requires them to create CVs and distribute them out, as well as attending interviews. Furthermore, whilst balancing education and placement, the trainees must also upkeep their personal life, which comes with dealing with the day-to-day stressors. Now we are going to look at the impact all of these factors have on trainee counsellors. So with imposter syndrome, evidence actually shows that counsellors struggle with doubts and insecurities of not feeling good enough. This could be due to the pressure to manage switching from being a student, researcher and therapist, which can be difficult to distinguish. This change in roles can be difficult and could cause trainees to doubt their achievements and abilities, which is a form of imposter syndrome. Next, we have perfectionism. So trainees that have perfectionism traits are at risk of getting overwhelmed, as there are many stresses that must be managed. For example, a trainee is required to learn the knowledge to understand therapeutic terms, develop self-awareness through reflection and personal development, and also pass all the requirements to be fit to practice. Trainees are also impacted by burnout, as studies have investigated the risk of burnout within trainee psychologists and found that 75% of them reported high levels of stress and 41% reported feeling depression, anxiety and low self-esteem. This highlights why trainees should be investigated so interventions can be introduced. For the methods section, 41 students volunteered but only 22 completed it successfully. 16 of these were female, 5 were male and 1 preferred not to say. The participants' age ranged from between 22 and 54. This study used a qualitative approach which used Pearson's correlation to investigate the links between all the variables. The analysis of the results allowed room to recognise what associations there are or aren't, which comes with the assumption of recognising that all trainees are different. I must note that ethically everything was approved with minor risk to participants. The measures consisted of 3 questionnaires, the first one being the Imposterism scale, which was a 7-question self-report scale which answered using a 5-point Likert type scale. So 1 means not at all a characteristic of me, and 5 being extremely a characteristic of me. Next is the short almost perfect scale, which is similar to the last, but it was answered using a 7-point Likert scale, which ranged from 1 strongly disagree to 7 strongly agree. The Copenhagen Burnout Inventory was used to determine burnout within 3 levels: personal, work, and client. Statements were answered using response categories of always to never. The procedure of this study was as follows. So firstly, the link to the Qualtrics online questionnaire was obtained through the adverts that were posted. Once opened, the participants must read the information sheet, which is followed by a consent form. Once consent is given to the participants, they are then able to read the instructions for the questionnaire. Next, they are presented with questions such as, are you currently training to be a counsellor in the UK? If the participant answers no to any of these questions, they cannot carry on with the study. Demographic questionnaires were then filled and presented to them. This was followed by the Imposterism scale, almost perfect scale, and then the Copenhagen Burnout Inventory. Once these were completed, the participant was then shown the debrief and summary, which highlights that if they want to withdraw their answers from the study, it is still possible, and it shows the contact information for if they have any queries. So now on to the results. When looking at imposter syndrome and personal burnout, a Pearson's correlation of 0.596 in SPSS means that there is a strong positive relationship between the 2 variables being compared, and the 0.003 means it is significant. When looking at imposter syndrome and work burnout, a Pearson's correlation of minus 0.109 means that there is a weak negative relationship between the 2 variables, with 0.628 being not significant. Then looking at imposter syndrome and client burnout, a Pearson's correlation of 0.367 means that there is a moderate positive relationship between the 2 variables, with no significance at 0.093. Now looking at perfectionism and personal burnout, a Pearson's correlation of 0.530 means that there is a strong positive relationship between the 2 variables, with 0.011 meaning it is significant. For perfectionism and work burnout, a Pearson's correlation of minus 0.157 was reported, which means that there is a weak negative relationship between the 2 variables being compared, with 0.485 meaning it is not significant. When looking at perfectionism and client burnout, a correlation of 0.315 means that there is a moderate positive relationship between the 2 variables, with 0.154 showing no significance. When looking at imposter syndrome and perfectionism, a Pearson's correlation of 0.677 was reported, which means that there is a strong positive relationship between the 2 variables, and the result is statistically significant at the 0.1 level. So what this means is that if Pearson's R shows that there is a strong correlation, but there is no significance, it means that the relationship between the 2 variables being compared is most likely real, but the sample size or other factors prevented the results from being statistically significant. This study was able to highlight the effects of imposter syndrome and perfectionism on burnout, which allows researchers to highlight the importance of introducing interventions. For example, researchers found that mindfulness-based interventions are good at tackling burnout within healthcare professionals, as it pursues a state of mind which is free from self-judgmental feelings and self-controlling tendencies. Overall, this study brought attention to the impact imposter syndrome and perfectionism have on burnout, but it must be noted that the sample size was not big enough, which is why some of the results could have not been significant. If this study was to be done again, I'd recommend using a larger sample size. Thank you to everyone who watched my presentation. I appreciate that you took the time to watch, and I hope I've been able to share useful knowledge on imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and the risk of burnout. As most of you watching are trainees, I hope I have brought your attention to the risk of burnout and highlighted that there are interventions out there to help tackle this. Thanks everyone for watching, and if you have any comments, leave them down below. Thank you.